Rain was beating down on that narrow two-lane highway close to midnight when our Harley line suddenly slammed on the brakes. Through the flicker of our headlights, I saw her, this pregnant woman, stumbling out of a ditch like she'd used the last bit of strength she had left. Her knees were covered in mud, blood streaked across her cheek, and she held her belly like she was trying to keep the world from falling apart. "He left me to die," she whispered, and then her legs just gave out. Before the story really begins, let me pause a second. Tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. The lead bike cut its engine, and the night went quiet again. Just rain and our breathing. I was already off my Harley before the others even reacted. I'm Beck Lansing, captain of the White Hollow Charter of the Hells Angels, and my boots sank straight into the wet gravel as I knelt beside her. I pressed 2 fingers gently to her neck. Her pulse felt thin, shaky, like it wasn't sure it wanted to keep going. "Talk to me," I murmured, keeping my voice calm, steady. Her eyelids fluttered. Names," she breathed. "Mara, please, don't let him come back." Behind me, my sergeant, 9, moved without a word. Big guy, quiet as stone. Folks call him 9 because he's built like 9 normal men stacked together. He shrugged off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders like he'd done it 1,000 times. "Ambulance?" he asked. "Closest unit's about 40 minutes out," I said, scanning that lonely stretch of road. Cornfields on both sides, black with rain. No houses, no passing cars, nothing but our convoy and the storm. Red taillights glowed behind us as the brothers formed a protective arc around the scene. Mara winced, one hand going to her ribs. "He kicked," she started, but a contraction punched the breath right out of her. She gripped my wrist with a strength born out of sheer terror. "Load and go," I ordered. My guys moved like a NASCAR pit crew. 9 cleared space in the chase van. Stitch, our road medic, snapped on gloves. Diesel stepped out onto the road and stopped traffic cold, with nothing but a flashing wand and a look that told anyone passing by to think twice. I lifted Mara carefully. "You're safe," I told her, "and I'm not asking for permission." By the time we reached Ridgewater County Hospital, the place looked like a tired ship stranded in the middle of a rainy sea. We pulled into the drop lane, shoulder to shoulder, engines steaming, chrome dripping with water. Nurses inside froze when they saw us, 20 soaked bikers in leather, faces carved by miles and weather. Stitch shoved the doors open with his hip, rolling Mara inside on a makeshift gurney he'd practically built out of our toolbox. "Female, 30s, 3rd trimester," he said, his voice sharp and professional. "Blunt trauma to the ribs, possible placental issues, hypotensive but conscious." The triage nurse snapped back into focus and nodded. "Trauma 3, but you all can't come back with her." 9 nodded toward the waiting room. "We'll be quiet. Promise we'll be quieter than church pews." I stayed beside the gurney until the last second. Mara's fingers found the edge of my cut and held on. "He said the baby ruined me," she whispered. "Said I was dead weight." My jaw locked. "What's his name?" She hesitated before saying it. "Tyler Voss." Heads turned at the charting station. That name had weight, the kind of weight that made people look down at the floor instead of meeting your eyes. The automatic doors slid shut in my face as the gurney rolled away. I stopped at the edge of the line we weren't allowed to cross, water dripping off me onto the rubber mat. I could hear the monitors kicking into rhythm behind those doors. Outside, the convoy settled in for a long night. Coffee, silence, and a wall of leather and steel ready for whatever came next. Hospitals are built from whispers. and under those buzzing fluorescent lights we felt every single one. Night shift nurses kept sneaking glances, trying to figure out what kind of trouble we were, or weren't. Diesel handed out vending machine coffees, cheap stuff, but the heat helped. Rain slapped against the windows. The muted TV flickered with some late-night news. 9 leaned toward me, resting his elbows on his knees. "You know Voss," he muttered. I kept my eyes on the trauma doors. Ran guns through the quarry roads. Owes a lot of men money. Owes a lot of women their lives back. The triage nurse came back, looking softer now. "She's stable. Baby's stubborn. Heartbeat strong. She keeps asking for you." I nodded once and followed her. Inside, Mara lay under a warm orange glow from a heat lamp, an oxygen cannula making her look smaller, almost fragile. When my boots stopped at her door, her eyes opened. "You stayed," she breathed. "Got bored out there," I said, with a tired smile that didn't touch my eyes. She swallowed hard. "He said he'd throw me in a ditch, and no one would ever look for me." "A lot of folks looked," I said softly. "They just didn't see the human part." A monitor beeped steadily, like a drumbeat for courage. Then blue lights washed across the waiting room glass. The sheriff walked in like the storm had given him permission, hat tucked under his arm, carrying paperwork that already sounded like blame. 2 deputies came in behind him, jittery with that kind of borrowed authority young cops get when they stand too close to a man with a badge. Heard you boys dropped off a mess tonight," Sheriff Calder said. He glanced at the chart. "Mara Linden, you withholding statements?" I stood up slow, letting all of my height answer for me. "We brought in a woman who needed help," I said. Calder's eyes scanned our patches, and I could see him mentally sorting through sins he assumed we'd collected over the years. Then he added, "Tyler Voss filed a report earlier. Says his wife stole his truck and assaulted him." 9 let out a single laugh, dark, low, sharp. "She assaulted the ground with her face," he muttered. Both deputies shifted, hands drifting toward their holsters. It wasn't a threat, just habit, nervous habit. The triage nurse stepped out like she'd been waiting for the right moment. Little thing in sneakers, but she held the whole hallway with her voice. "Sheriff, unless you brought an OB team and a miracle, you can leave your boots right where you're standing." Calder swallowed whatever he wanted to say. The room wasn't his anymore, and he felt it. He leaned toward me instead, trying to claw back some ground. "If Voss shows up," he said, "he's mine." "No," I told him quietly. "She's not yours to barter." Something in his face hardened like wet cement, drying too fast. "Stay out of my way," he said. I didn't blink. "I'll stand wherever her shadow needs me to." Rain clattered against the windows like it agreed. Somewhere deeper inside the hospital, a monitor started calming down, its rhythm steadying like a heartbeat, finding courage. Around 3:17 in the morning, the TV finally earned its place on the wall. A breaking news banner screamed across the bottom, bright red. We couldn't hear a word until 9 slapped the volume button. "Single vehicle rollover on County 12 near Black Pike Bridge. Driver identified as Tyler Voss, 34, declared deceased at the scene." The room went tight and still. Diesel let out a breath first. "That makes her a widow," he said. "No," I answered softly. "That just makes her free. Widows got nothing to do with justice." The triage nurse came back, voice gentler this time. "She's asking for water, and for the man with the road on his face." I followed her in. Mara listened as I told her what happened. I didn't sugarcoat anything, didn't make it heroic, just told her the truth straight. She stared up at the ceiling like she was counting the pieces of a future she never wanted. Finally, she whispered, "He left me to die. Beat whatever hope I had left. And then the road sent you." I rested my hand on the bed rail. "The road sends whoever it can." From the doorway, I saw Sheriff Calder watching us. Eyes narrowed, phone vibrating in his hand. A dead man brings a lot of politics with him. Outside, our guys were calling home, checking in, letting their families know they were alive and staying put. Dawn waited outside those windows, soft, pale, the kind of light that doesn't promise anything. By sunrise, the storm had rinsed the whole town clean, but it didn't change the way the morning felt. Mara slept under the haze of post-surgery meds. The angels gathered outside, leaning on railings, letting smoke curl into the first gold rays of day. 9 walked over and handed me a folded newspaper. The edges were so wet, the ink was bleeding. "Voss wasn't alone," he said. "Truck rolled after a chase. Witness says 2 bikes peeled off before it hit." I frowned. His own crew? Maybe. Or maybe someone tying up loose ends. Inside, Mara stirred. Her eyes blinked open slowly. I stepped back in. "Morning," I said. She looked groggy but present. "You stayed." "I told you I would." Her hand drifted over the blanket where her belly had been. I spoke quietly. "The baby's still fighting, little girl. They moved her to NICU. The doctor says she's got spirit." Tears slid down her cheeks, quiet, steady. "She deserves better than the world I came from." I nodded. "Then we build her a new one." Outside the window, the road shimmered in the morning light, stretching toward something that almost looked like mercy. 2 days later, the hospital felt smaller, pressurized, heavy with whispers. Reporters crowded the parking lot like vultures with microphones. Headlines were already circulating online. "Widow of outlaw? Tyler Voss rescued by Hell's Angels." Mara stared at one headline, then flipped the phone face down. "You don't owe them anything," I told her. "I owe the truth," she said quietly. "They'll twist it, I know they will, but lies are what got me here." I watched her for a long moment, thin, stitched up, but strong in ways she probably didn't see yet. "You ever ridden before?" I asked. She blinked. "A bike?" "Nope." "Good. Means you won't have any bad habits to break." She actually laughed, weak, but real. And for the first time since that night on the road, her eyes held something alive inside them. Outside, Diesel fired up his Harley, letting the engine rumble low and deep, the kind of sound that makes the windows hum like they're remembering storms. Mara glanced at me and said quietly, "You all scare people." I shrugged. So does thunder. But it still brings the rain you need. That line stuck with her. I could see it. By the time the hospital discharged her, she didn't give me a big thank you speech. She just gave me one slow nod, the kind that says a person isn't walking away anymore. They're choosing to stay, to ride, whether they know it yet or not. We escorted her straight from Ridgewater Hospital to our clubhouse, an old freight depot outside town that always smelled like oil, steel, and oak smoke. From the fire barrel we kept running in the yard. Inside, the walls were covered with maps, memorial photos, and old patches belonging to men who'd ridden their last mile. Mara stepped in like she wasn't sure the floor would hold her weight. She kept her hospital blanket clutched to her chest like armor. The moment she crossed the threshold, every conversation died. Even in our world, a world loud enough to drown out sins, it takes a lot to shut a room up. But truth does it faster than a gunshot. A biker's wife named Tess finally broke the tension. She was covered in flour, wiping her hands on her apron as she walked over. "You look like hell, sweetheart," she said gently. "Come sit. We fix people better than we fix engines around here." Mara gave a small, tired smile. "That's not saying much." "Maybe," Tess replied, "but engines don't thank you when you're done." I watched from the corner, arms crossed, trying to keep my face unreadable. Our club had buried brothers, started wars, ended others, and outrun more than a few sheriffs. But this wasn't about a fight or a rescue anymore. This was responsibility. Later that night, when the laughter softened and the fire dwindled, I found Mara standing near the door, staring at the line of bikes glowing under the string lights we'd hung for no real reason except comfort. "You ever think," she asked, voice barely above a whisper, "that the road chooses who it saves?" "Every damn mile," I answered, not needing to look at her. But the quiet didn't stick. 3 nights later, Diesel spotted movement by the front gate, 2 figures on dirt bikes circling the tree line. By sunrise, fresh tire tracks cut through the mud heading north. "They're checking who she's with," I said. Voss had partners. "Someone still wants whatever he stole," 9 added. "What was it? Cash? Guns?" Diesel asked. "Whatever makes men kill long after the reason goes cold." Mara had been standing in the doorway, listening. "He told me he was done running," she said. "I guess he meant he was done running with me." I met her eyes and shook my head. "Not anymore." Then I called out to 9. "Lock down the yard. No rides. Not till we know who's hunting." The hours crawled. Every motorcycle that revved outside made the hairs on my arms stand up. Mara sat in the main room, tracing her daughter's name on the tiny hospital tag. Laia Voss, small, fierce, still breathing. Tess saw her staring at it. "You okay?" she asked. Mara shook her head. "I don't want her to grow up afraid of shadows." "Then let her see you walk through them," Tess said softly. By dusk, Diesel's radio crackled alive, unfamiliar men's voices laughing too close to our property. The past wasn't done with her, not by a long shot. The first bullet blew apart a beer bottle on the bar. The second ripped the neon halo sign right off its hooks. Glass sprayed across the floor. "Down!" I yelled, grabbing Mara and pulling her behind the pool table. The angels moved like muscle memory, Diesel and 9 sprinting toward the gate. Tess dragging another woman behind the jukebox. Semi-auto fire shredded the siding, echoing off the steel. It lasted maybe 60 seconds. It felt like a whole hour. Then, silence. Gravel screamed as tires tore away into the night. Smoke drifted inside through the open door. I stood slowly, gun still drawn. "Anyone hurt?" "Couple cuts," Diesel answered. "Nothing deep. They were trying to spook us." "They failed," I said. Mara was shaking, bits of glass sparkling in her hair. "They know where I am," she whispered. "They always did," I said, voice low. "But now they know where I stand." Outside, the headlights faded across the fields, retreating, regrouping, maybe promising another night like this one. I holstered my weapon and scanned the tree line. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," I told her. Mara held my gaze, her voice thin but steady. "I'm not afraid," she said. "I'm angry." And honestly, that was better. Anger can move a person forward. Fear just nails their feet to the floor. By morning, the whole compound smelled like gasoline and hard decisions. The angels worked like they always did before trouble. Patching bullet holes, sweeping up glass, tightening every bolt and latch like surgeons getting ready for a storm they couldn't quite see yet. I moved through all of it in silence, checking locks, checking gear, checking the faces of my brothers. Mara sat on the porch steps, watching us, her hospital wristband still hanging from her arm like a reminder she wasn't healed yet. "You think they'll come back?" she asked. I didn't stop tightening the gate chain. "They always come back. The real question is who's standing here when they do." She studied me for a long moment, the way responsibility sat on my shoulders like an old familiar weight. "Why risk all this?" she asked quietly. "You don't even know me." I looked her straight in the eyes. "We know exactly what it feels like to be left in a ditch." That shut her up, not because she was hurt, but because she recognized there wasn't pity in my voice, just truth. Raw and shared. Nine came out, wiping his hands on a rag. "Vans are fueled. Diesel's got a route planned. If we need to move her and the kid, we're ready." Mara shook her head hard. "No more running. Not from ghosts." Something in me eased at that. Pride, maybe. "All right then," I said. "We don't run. We make them wish they had." Thunder rumbled far off. Hard to tell if it was the weather or just another kind of war warming up. That afternoon, I rode out alone toward the burned quarry. Old ground where deals were made, debts were paid, and a whole lot of bad memories stayed buried under rock and soot. Even in the rain, the place still smelled faintly of diesel and gunpowder. Tracks cut east across the dirt, old but familiar enough to tighten my jaw. Voss and his crew had haunted these roads for years. I crouched and ran my glove through the dirt, thinking back to the first time I'd met Tyler Voss. We'd been young then, angry, hungry, believing outlaw life was some kind of freedom. One of us grew up, I muttered. A low engine hummed behind me. I felt it before I turned, a black pickup idling in the heat shimmer. A man stepped out, tattoos across his neck, cheap grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Heard you're babysitting the widow," he said. "She's got something that belongs to us." I stood up slow, eyes steady. "She's got a newborn, that's it." That's not what Tyler told us. His grin faded when I stepped closer. Then Tyler lied to both of us. We stared each other down, heat rising from the pavement between us like a warning neither of us cared to hear. After a long beat, he spit into the dirt and backed toward his truck. "You're gonna regret picking her side." I watched the truck disappear into the tree line. "I already picked," I said quietly, "and I already don't." By the time I got back, dusk had settled heavy over the yard. I found Mara in the old barn, sitting beside an oil drum fire. She held a bottle of water with both hands, like she needed something solid to anchor her. Her daughter, tiny, swaddled, perfect, slept in a little travel crib at her feet. "You went out there?" she said softly. "I had to know what's coming," I answered, leaning against one of the posts. "Men who think fear makes them immortal." She nodded, eyes catching the firelight. "He used to say that fear was a tool, said it kept me loyal." I crouched beside her. "Fear keeps you alive. Loyalty makes you human. Those are not the same thing." She looked at me then, something shifting behind her eyes, opening like a door she hadn't dared touch before. "Do you ever get tired of saving people who don't think they're worth saving?" she whispered. I gave her a small smile. "Every damn day, but I do it anyway." The baby stirred, her tiny fingers curling. Mara reached down and brushed her daughter's hand. "Her name's Leia," she said. I nodded once. "Leia it is." For a moment something passed between us. Not romance, not obligation. Just two people who'd survived the same fire in different ways, recognizing the burn marks on each other. The next night was too quiet, the dangerous kind of quiet. No wind, no headlights. Even the dogs stayed still. I sat outside the clubhouse, cigarette burning in the dark like a little warning light. 9 came out, with his helmet tucked under his arm. "You ever think we attract trouble?" he asked. I blew out smoke. "Trouble's just the road checking if you still deserve to be on it." 9 grunted. "You're getting poetic again. Or I'm getting old." Inside, Mara's voice drifted out, soft, singing something to Laya that sounded more like prayer than lullaby. It cracked something open in both of us that we'd never admit. A car door slammed down the hill. I crushed the cigarette under my boot, my hand going straight to my sidearm. Diesel's radio hissed to life. "Movement at the fence. 2 trucks." Neen's face hardened. "Guess peace clocked out early." "Let's greet them proper," I said, getting to my feet. Engines fired up one by one, the roar rolling across the valley like a warning shot. Mara appeared in the doorway, clutching her baby. I met her eyes. "Lock the door." Then the storm hit. Headlights cut through the dust. Gunfire tore through the air. Beck's Harley lay on its side as I dove for cover behind the low wall with Diesel. Bullets sparked against concrete. Gravel kicked up like angry hail. 9 sprinted right, shouting, "2 on the ridge!" I answered with short, controlled bursts, my mind going into that cold, steady place it always does when bullets start flying. Years of this life had taught me one thing. War doesn't disappear. It just keeps swapping out names. Inside the clubhouse, Mara was crouched behind the bar, curling herself around Laya and tucking a jacket over the baby's tiny body. "Come on, sweetheart. Just breathe," she whispered, every gunshot rattling through her ribs like it wanted to break her all over again. Then, silence. One truck sputtered out like a dying animal. The other peeled backward in a panic, tires screaming as it fishtailed into the dark. I lowered my rifle, chests rising and falling like I'd run miles. "Count," I barked. "3 down," Diesel said. "1 runner?" "Let him go," I said, my voice rough from smoke and adrenaline. "He's going to tell the others exactly what this place costs." Mara stepped out slowly, shaking so hard I thought her knees might quit. Through the smoke and the flickering firelight, her eyes found mine. "You okay?" she asked. I wiped blood from my cheek, felt it sting, nodded once. "We're all still standing. That's enough for tonight." Then the baby cried, a small, cracking sound that felt like the first hint of sunrise in the middle of hell. After the last shot faded, the whole world went quiet. Only the cooling engines hissed like angry metal catching its breath. Diesel walked through the wreckage, kicking debris, counting bodies under his breath like he was marking time in a grim song. I leaned against the wall, feeling blood trail down from my temple. Mara came out barefoot, Laya held tight against her. Smoke curled into her hair like pale ghosts. "Is it over?" she asked. "For tonight," I said. "Tomorrow we'll ask the same question." She looked out at the bruised horizon, unsure of anything anymore. "You ever get tired of fighting?" "Every damn day," I said. "But the road doesn't stop just because you're worn out." I nodded toward the baby. "That kid's got more fight in her than most men I've buried." Mara managed a little smile. "Then she must take after the wrong crowd." I laughed once, short, sharp, honest. Maybe the right crowd finally showed up. When dawn finally cracked open, the angels gathered what was left of the night. No cops, no sirens, just the growl of warming engines, chrome catching the early sun, and the quiet truth that not every war ends with a win. Some just end with you still breathing. 2 weeks later, the clubhouse felt less like a bunker and more like a family. We'd patched up the walls, swept out the damage, and somehow the laughter had gotten louder. One morning Mara made breakfast, burned the eggs, dumped in too much salt, probably set back cooking 100 years. But everyone ate like it was a feast. I walked in halfway through, helmet in hand, beard getting thicker, eyes softer than I meant them to be. "You feeding an army?" I teased. She smirked. "Only the ones who saved my life." Laya slept in a crate, lined with flannel. Dial humming lullabies, he'd deny until the day he died. The world was still shaky, fragile, but it held. I poured myself a cup of coffee and leaned on the counter. "You ever think about staying?" I asked. She froze. "This isn't exactly daycare friendly." "Neither is the world outside," I said. She looked down, then up at me again. "I don't belong here." I nodded. Neither did any of us, not at first. The radio crackled with news. One of Voss's old crew had been arrested. Someone had flipped, talking to the feds. Maybe justice wasn't clean, but it was starting to crawl our way. Mara let out a long breath. "Guess ghosts really do fade." "Only when you stop feeding 'em," I said with a small smile. Outside, sunlight poured over the rows of bikes, warming the chrome. For the first time since all this began, she seemed hungry to hear the engines again. That evening I took her out onto the open road. No convoy, no backup, just the two of us and a long stretch of asphalt trying to catch the sunset. At first, she held on to me lightly, unsure, adjusting to the pulse of the Harley beneath her. The wind caught her hair, pulled it free, and she finally let out a breath she'd been holding for years. "Hold on tighter," I yelled over my shoulder. She laughed into the wind. "If I hold tighter, you'll have to marry me." "Then I better slow down," I shot back. For the first time in months, she laughed without hurt. We rode until the sky turned violet, until the horizon felt bigger than our problems. At a ridge overlooking the valley, I cut the engine. The silence drifted in, soft as breath. Mara stepped off the bike and stared at the fading sky. "I used to think the road was where people went when they were running from something," she said. I shrugged. "Sometimes it's the place people go when they're finally heading home." She nodded, eyes shining, wind tugging at her jacket. In that moment, freedom wasn't loud. It didn't roar, it just breathed. It didn't roar anymore, it whispered. And for the first time, she finally understood what surviving felt like when it wasn't just running. Weeks slid into a steady rhythm. Leia grew stronger, her soft cries slowly turning into bright giggles that bounced around the yard like sunlight. Tess built her a cradle out of old Harley parts and leftover lumber. It looked half rebel artwork, half miracle, but it held that baby like it had always been meant for her. The angels, men carved out of storms and scars, started softening around the child without even noticing. I caught Diesel one afternoon making ridiculous faces just to hear her laugh. "You tell anyone, I'll flatten your tires," he snapped. Yeah, I said. "You're a real threat to society." Mara watched everything from the porch, a quiet warmth settling in the places fear used to live. For the first time in her life, she wasn't tracking escape routes or counting hours. She was setting down roots, on the blacktop, in the club's strange version of family, and in a kind of peace she'd never known existed. That night she sat beside me under the stars. Leia slept between us, tiny breaths rising and falling. "You think people like us ever get happy endings?" she asked. I looked over at her, firelight catching in her eyes. "Nah," I said honestly. "We get new beginnings instead. Better deal if you ask me." She smiled at that, leaning back against the step. The air smelled like oil, dust, and something almost sacred. Maybe redemption always carried that smell. The road was quiet, but I could tell she still felt its promise humming inside her bones. Spring crept slowly into Ridgewater, painting the trees with cautious little strokes of green. Mara stood outside the clubhouse one morning, Laya perched on her hip, watching the convoy roll out for a charity ride. Helmets flashing in the sun, flags snapping in the wind. It looked like a small army leaving to go do some good for once. I idled beside her on my Harley. "We'll be back before dark," I said. "Try not to get shot," she teased. I grinned. We try that every day. As I pulled away, I caught her reflection in my rearview mirror, steadier, stronger, fully alive, in a way she hadn't been the night we found her. Tess came up beside her with a mug of coffee. "You ever think you'd end up here?" she asked. Mara shook her head. "I used to think the road took everything from me. Turns out it gave me back what mattered." The Harleys thundered down the asphalt, fading into dust trails and sunlight. Laya clapped her tiny hands at the noise, laughing like it was the greatest sound in the world. Mara bent her head and whispered into her daughter's hair. "Remember that sound, baby. That's the sound of people who don't quit." Behind them, the sunlight hit the Angels' insignia painted across the clubhouse wall. Worn, stubborn, beautiful. And for the first time, the word family didn't sting when she said it. It felt true. Some rides end. Others keep going long after the engines cool. If this story found you tonight, remember this. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it trembles, sometimes it cries, sometimes it heals in pieces. But it still gets back up. Ride safe, stay good, and keep your faith in the road ahead.